and I'll die on this hill, is there is a personality type that lends itself to these issues too. We're very type A people. I just say it how it is. We're type A people. We can be neurotic at times, perfectionism because of, that need for control of our situation and our environment and all these variables.
Hey, everybody. Thanks so much for tuning into the first Optimal podcast. Really glad you're here. We have another great guest for you today. Some similar experiences he has as some of our other guests, but also some other different experiences, which I think you guys will find a lot of value in. So thanks again for tuning in, and really excited to have Austin Stout on here. So he is a coach. He really did a lot of work in the physique sports area. Worked with some friends of mine that I know that are really high-level athletes, perform very high level, very well educated too. So it's always a good sign if there's a coach out there and, someone with their doctorate degree is working with that coach. They usually tend to know what they're talking about, right? But what's unique is he also works a lot with special cases and general health. And we're going to kind of unpack all that and get into it in today's episode. So we'll start diving in. So thanks, Austin, for joining us. Appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me. And I look forward to chatting about whatever direction it kind of takes us in. Like I said, I have my hands in a lot of different pots. So
yeah. Well, and it's one of the things I often will try to do is make some kind of outline, and then, the old Mike Tyson saying, right? Everyone has a plan until you get punched in the face. So it's like I have a plan until the podcast starts.
Right.
I think my last guest, we went on like a 30-minute discussion about detox. She was just so well educated in that space. I had two other topics that we never even got to that I prepped her that we were going to get to them before it. But anyways, we're here. So
yeah.
Austin comes to us from Ohio, a little north of Columbus. I'm in Michigan, so we'll try not to let that disrupt the episode at all.
Sure. For people that don't understand that, haven't been under a rock, right? But
yeah, if they don't understand, it's only the greatest rivalry in all of sports is Ohio State and Michigan football. So, well, good stuff, man. So yeah, I met you actually from indirectly a little bit. I've heard a lot about you. And I think we were going to link up before, and we had just a change I had a co-host at the time with the last podcast. We weren't able to get you on, but I'm really glad we have you this time. But yeah, Danny LaMartina. So she, for those who don't know, was a world-class powerlifter, professional in physique sports as well, and actually competed at the Olympia. Was that 2 years ago, I think?
Yeah, 2023, I believe.
2023. Yeah. So, she reached the peak and all that, and also has her doctorate in physical therapy, as I mentioned. So she's got her stuff together, but she still, works with Austin. I highly recommend him for all things, related to the topics we're going to cover today. So how did you and Danny link up?
So, I won't disclose too much of Danny's, personal information, but she was experiencing some dysregulation. You can call like a really broad term there. After just years of competing, especially after that Olympia run there, a lot of overlap, like a lot of people, a lot of overlapping things between autoimmunity. Lupus was part of that, which was a previous diagnosis. And of course, a lot of gut issues and adrenal issues and things. It's like pretty much you could open a textbook and put your finger on something, and it was probably part of the situation. So unpacking something like that, it's taken us some time, but we're making good progress now.
Oh, okay. Well, that's good to hear. And just for those out there too, how did you get into some of the more specialized areas in your nutrition background? I know you went to school for nutrition, things of that nature, but just for those who maybe don't know, could walk us through that journey. And there's a lot of coaches out there, but I think, like I said, some of yours is you're working with much very high level type of athletes and or very difficult situations or challenges, if you will, that people are having. So I'm just curious how you got to that. that spot?
Very organically, in a way, just because I know now it's a huge space, and there's a lot of people in the coaching sector. They want to get into the space because they know if they can offer those types of services, they can reach more people and just have a more complete service. But I really just saw a need for it, and I was having a lot of my own issues, which were mostly just self-induced by being a dumb competitor and competing too often and running myself into the ground and doing all that stuff. So I learned the hard way, essentially, with my own gut issues and hormonal issues. I was very fortunate to have and still have a very good doctor he is technically a family doctor, but he's very much into this space as well. You may have heard Dr. Eric Serrano in Ohio.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. So I know Eric. I've known Eric for years. So he kind of like introduced me to some things as well. Long story short, I started with myself and, was trying to solve my own problems, and the information was fairly limited at the time. But nonetheless, you know how it is, as you learn things, you can't unlearn them. So you see things. It's like when I work with coaches and they intake a client, and then they intake that same client 6 months later, they have a completely different view on that person because now they have all this new knowledge.
Right.
So it's like I just by default was seeing these patterns and these trends. And it's like, okay, well, why does Susie lose weight when you take away 300 calories, but Jill does not lose weight when you take away 300 calories, basic stuff, right? And then that escalated. That just continued to escalate and escalate and escalate and escalate until you have to go down further and further in rabbit holes, and you're getting referrals that are more and more and more complex. And then you're getting people that are asking you for education. That was a new thing for me. I'm like, okay, you're going to pay me to teach you stuff? Like, okay. And then that, of course, expanded over the last probably 7 or 8 years, the mentorship portion. So it's just happened by kind of just by default of existing.
Sure.
For lack of better words.
Yeah. And I think one of the topics, several that we'll get into here, but one of the things that comes up a lot, at least in the kind of general population, is gut health, and where that manifests and what potential causes that and those type of things. But I'm curious if we talk just to start to unpack the topic at a high level. You mentioned from competing. So I'm curious how you've seen male and or female bodybuilders and their gut health, or physique sport competitors and their gut health. Like, why are they having issues with gut health? Is there a difference between men and women? I think just kind of walking through some of the layers there and understanding like what your experience are, because I think it's unique to have a different population that is eating such clean food and is dialed in 24/7, but yet they're still having these issues. So like, what are some things you're seeing?
So I love that you asked that. I had somebody ask that to me a couple nights ago. I was doing a little Q&A box on my story, and they asked like, well, why are we seeing so many gut issues? And because we're doing all these things right. And I think that that's a great question, because there's a few things. We're still mechanistically, we're still humans. So if we consider that we have all these family stresses, relationship stresses, career stresses, I have that. Non-competitor people have that, right? So that's all fairly similar. We do some things probably better. Maybe we sleep quality, sleep hygiene, our nutrition, but we're also beating ourselves to death in the gym. So there's another, sympathetic response that we're getting like all the time.
Yeah.
Now the biggest thing, and I'll die on this hill, is there is a personality type that lends itself to these issues too. We're very type A people. Like just say it how it is. We're type A people. We can be neurotic at times, perfectionism, because of, that need for control of our situation and our environment and all these variables. That can be a very difficult thing to navigate when you're dealing with these issues. It can be additive. It's like an additive effect to our problems, because it's so stressful to recognize and feel and hyperfixate on symptoms and these things. So you're like, competitors are really, really bad when it comes to that stuff. So that has such an additive effect to their how their symptoms present, right? Versus a general population client who maybe doesn't really know anything, so they can't really get in their own way quite as much, right? Not knowing things has disadvantages because maybe they don't know how to follow a plan as well, right? But it has advantages because ignorance is bliss in some ways there, as you know, too.
Sure.
Men and women aren't a lot different, except for that men just tend to have more general resilience, I would say, as a whole. The other thing about men is they don't, they tend to not talk about their symptoms as much. So
Right.
I don't know that I would say that, yes, women probably have, as a percentage, probably have more problems, and they also have menstrual cycles. So that's a different thing that men don't have.
Sure.
But I think the amount of men that struggle with these issues is probably underplayed just because it just doesn't really get talked about. And I work with a lot of men. So actually my functional health S clients are probably 50% men, 50% women. Sometimes it's been as high as 80% men at times because I think I'm a guy. So they come to
Sure.
me and they want to, talk to me. So yeah, men, I mean, men struggle. They just don't generally handle things psychologically the same way.
Sure.
But yeah, but competitors just have such a high, stress load as a whole. And if fatigue isn't managed and, environment's not managed, it's just a matter of time. I mean, you're going to run into some kind of problem. Hopefully when it happens, you back off rather than ignore it. And as things will compound,
Yeah, and I think it's a great point too about the fatigue point, because I think there's a few coaches I've heard say this, but I think I was interviewing, it was on a different podcast we had, but is Chris Tuttle a while ago, and he talked about how he asked questions related to fatigue because his athletes won't admit that they're fatigued. They think it's like, oh, my coach is challenging me, and he had to like frame it. I want to say he was doing like a number scale week to week, like relative to the week before. How do you feel?
Right, comparison.
And because it was more comparative than, because most, I'm going to say guys, maybe it's with women too, but a lot of guys I know are like, I feel great, coach. Like, I'm ready to rock. And it's like, you're like death right now. So I think I am curious, what are your methods for managing fatigue, and how maybe someone listening, like how would fatigue manifest if they're the type of person that does have that tendency to just plow through things when they really are fatigued and probably should be taking a break?
I call that perceived well-being. It's a perception of I do something similar with the comparison, because if we use a 1 to 10 scale, a 1 might actually be a 10.
Right.
And if we were to look at some serum labs, we're like, your 1 is not correct. Right. So we definitely, I can't tell you how many times I've had people come in and then see their labs. I'm like, I don't care what you say, you feel like this is not lining up.
Right.
So just vetting that out and getting objective feedback is step one. And you kind of got to figure out different people. It can be easier with different people than others. So you have to play the psychology game a little bit there. But once you can get to that point, if assuming that it's not an acute situation, like if we look at something like contest prep, there's going to be, or just even general population fat loss, when you're getting maybe towards the end of whatever, your goal is, there's going to be some accumulation of fatigue. You don't want it to get to the point where it's a detriment to your results or things start going the other direction. You also have to consider that the sustainability of whatever method you're using, especially if it's general population. Contest prep's not meant to be sustainable. Like, you're not trying to be reckless, but you're not going to look like that the whole time.
Right,
So
right.
like, you just have to accept that. But I think that with Gen Pop especially, there's been a large push around, because a lot of women especially undereat historically. So there's a large push to just feed people, which we need food. We have a lot of micronutrient deficiencies. We see these things a lot, but food in and of itself doesn't really fix fatigue. I mean, food will correct some things, right? It will provide an energy source. It will provide, cholesterol for hormone formation. It will provide fiber for your gut and vitamins and minerals. But food doesn't really correct you doing 30,000 steps a day. Like you can't just offset massive amounts of stress, whether it be activity or psychological, with just eating more,
Right.
So, and the other thing I see there too is there's kind of been this push to just feed up. And we're almost creating gut issues on the other side of that, because it's like a badge of honor that I got my, Sally's eating 2,800 calories. I'm like, well, now she has a gut issue that's worse than when she started.
Right.
Like he kind of defeats the purpose. So we have to feed people adequately, but fatigue reduction is usually just vetting out like where is it coming from, and then once we do that, what's the path of least resistance? Usually, it's really difficult to correct emotional and psychological fatigue right off the bat. That is a home front thing. That's a job thing. That's a relationship. That's a personality thing. You can get better at it over time, but people generally start with the quantifiable stuff, which is cardio training, because that's kind of it's a program, it's numbers. So it's like, I know if you're doing this much, we can just do less.
Right.
We can especially pick the really systemically taxing stuff. Like walking around's not that taxing. I mean, maybe at a point, but doing squats and deadlifts is very taxing, right? Especially at high frequencies. So that kind of stuff is the easiest place to start, but we also have to consider what's the client going to allow us to do and not freak out about. So you can kind of figure out what's the easiest things to take away that they're not emotionally attached to, and then work to the harder stuff. It's like, I always use this with my client. I'd say, have you ever seen Dave Ramsey, talks about financial,
Oh, yeah.
He's like, baby steps. We start with the smallest debts and we go to the biggest debts.
Right.
It's essentially kind of what we're doing here, is we're starting with the smallest fatigue debts that are easiest and to wrap our head around. And then we work up to the big stuff. If you're having panic attacks every day, I can't just tell you to not have panic attacks every day. Is that contributing? Absolutely.
Right.
It's going to be really difficult to just be like, I'm done. I'm not going to do that anymore.
Yeah.
So we have to go kind of smallest to biggest. Maybe there's outsourcing some therapy in there, even if we need to. So it can get kind of complex.
Yeah, no, I think it's a really good point to, someone to help figure out where is their pain point, if you will, that's causing some of these issues. Because to your point, it's almost like maybe someone who's not exercising, yes, they're adding a stress, but maybe at the beginning of that program, it could be more restorative, because part of why they have the weight gain, why they have the gut issue, why they have, you mentioned your analogy earlier of one person losing on X calories less, the other person not. Maybe their system just is so overpowered, but they need movement and nature and all the good healthy stuff that just is free to kind of help lower some of that load. But I'm curious, is there any initial, have it be fatigue or gut health, are there any kind of go-to? I mean, we're painting with a broad brush here, so for those out there, this is where individual coaching comes in, but maybe your top 2 or 3 kind of go-to techniques or protocols, have it be for fatigue or gut health, that come to mind, kind of good go-tos for people out there.
Yeah, for both of those, on the fatigue side, like I said, you bring up a good point. For some people, activity can be restorative. If they're not doing anything, movement will help to a point. For the people that are doing a substantial amount of movement already, maybe we can't take all of it away, but maybe we can redirect it to something else that's just that they still enjoy, that's maybe not as taxing. Some other kind of activity. And I ask people, did you play sports? Did you do other things? Did you have other hobbies? There's got to be something else that you used to enjoy besides, bar hopping on the weekend.
Sure.
That we can maybe redirect some of your time in that dopaminergic effect that you're looking for, right? So what else can we do? And if you say that you don't have any hobbies or other interests, there's our first problem.
Right.
We need to start there. There's got to be something. So we can redirect some of that, and then within what they're already doing, training. There's a lot of simple things. I mean, I don't have to necessarily take their volume and total amount down that much. I can change the exercise selection, for example. You know, if they're doing a lot of intensifiers and they're doing a lot of like multi-joint movements that require a lot of stabilization with like barbells and standing, like squats and deadlifts, if you put someone in a machine, I mean, I'm automatically taking away a ton of the bracing, and that's like 50% less fatiguing, like right there. So just changing what they're doing can be really a simple start. And then I tell people, think of things as kind of a reduction, not elimination. We don't have to take everything away. We can just, if we can get a 25% reduction in fatigue or 50% reduction in fatigue, and that's maybe hopeful, but if that's going to help. But what people tend to notice is as soon as they feel the positive effects of that, our buy-in goes up because they're like, oh, okay, well, this feels a little better. I'm getting out of bed a little bit easier, or my training performance actually went up a little bit because I'm not so ran down.
Beat up, yeah.
Austin might be correct, even though I didn't want to buy it at first.
Sure.
This might be helping. So now I have some buy-in, and we can kind of run with that, and then I can kind of move on to maybe the stuff that was a little bit harder to touch on. On the GI side, it's, again, you get two different camps. I mean, if it's someone that's very rigid on the diet already versus somebody that's maybe coming in off the street, if they're eating McDonald's 3 times a day, you got a lot of room to work. Like, don't,
sure.
like, you know, eat fruits and vegetables and, you know, eat whole foods. Now, those types of people generally don't need as much specificity as far as like doing very strict food selection. Like, we have parameters, we have,
Sure.
maybe we are measuring, we're doing things that, depending on what their ability to do that and their goal, but they're going to get a lot from just not eating junk, you know? So people talk about doing things like low FODMAP and elimination diets and this and that. I'm like, you're going to reduce the feeding of all these pathogens by like not eating junk.
Right. Yeah.
Like, you don't have to be so ultra specific with them that it's stressful for them to do it, because they don't really have the skills yet. And if they do, maybe you can be a little bit more specific. But with competitors, the biggest thing with competitors, or I don't even have competitors, just lifestyle bodybuilders, food varieties, not great a lot of the time. Like, they eat the same 5 things for 2 decades. That is about the worst thing you can do for microbial diversity ever. You don't have to have 25 different foods, but you also can't expect all of your, you know, beneficial bacteria to get fed when you're eating like beef, chicken, rice, and eggs for 20 years.
Right.
You may not even necessarily end up with SIBO or Candida or some kind of pathogen overgrowth, but you probably end up with low commensal bacteria over time. So for a lot of them, and I know this is so, it goes against a lot of what kind of goes on, is that instead of going like a low FODMAP, I'm actually like, we need to get some diversity in the diet, because your commensal bacteria is so low that your host defense system is broken down. So now all these like overgrowths that you don't have the immune system to do anything.
Right.
Because if I take those people and I throw them in a SIBO protocol with antimicrobials, if they don't have the immune system, they tend to have like worse die-off than other people. They're having more like histamine, you know, and mast cell reactions, and their skin's blowing up and they feel like shit. And they're like, Austin, I can't do the oregano oil because I'm peeing out my butt every day. You know what I mean? And so I think that might be a first step with them a lot of the time. But yeah, you can be a little bit more specific. So beyond that, just usually starting with repairing the gut lining, you know, repairing the mucosal lining, depending on what kind of, symptoms that they're presenting.
So in that example, is to talk it back here and to walk through it again. Someone comes in, they have an overgrowth, but you're saying the commensal bacteria is low. So if you attack the overgrowth without that commensal bacteria being higher, that could be problematic as well. Like the actual therapies you're doing to fix it would be harder to deal with in that case without some of that fixed. So would you do a different order of operation there? Like you're working on, or you do them both at the same time? Generally, I mean, I know there's a lot of nuance to individual protocols, but just curious to, because basically just for everyone out there, and maybe you can frame it up a little bit to, if someone doesn't know what these terms mean, but they have like this overgrowth or pathogens, and you have like your commensal bacteria, then we kind of, gut permeability as you were talking about as well. So do you approach like kind of a strategy for all three? Do you do one first generally, or how do you walk through that?
So if we're going to get complex, hopefully we have some kind of GI map or something to start with
to see what's going on.
If we don't, then we just need to, we're going to have to go slow and kind of do process of elimination with that. But let's assume that we do. And we see that they have, they're presenting 2 or 3 overgrowths. They're symptomatic, but they have some low commensal bacteria. I can probably tackle that at the same time. I could probably tackle that simultaneously. And I know it seems kind of counterintuitive because we want to, a lot of the focus is around kind of starving out the dysbiotic bacteria. That helps speed up the kill off when you're using, antibiotics or antimicrobials. And it does. The problem is that the commensal bacteria are probably more picky in terms of what they want to eat and consume. Pathogens will eat a lot of stuff. They're like raccoons in a dumpster. There was even a paper that I saw about yeast eating nitrogen. It'll eat protein. So you can do a carnivore diet, but the yeast is still getting fed and the commensal bacteria is getting starved out. So a lot of these people get symptom relief and then they have a high recurrence rate later. We're trying to do things post protocol like probiotics and adding FODMAPs back in and doing all that stuff. But I find that can work. That can work probably better if the commensal bacteria is pretty good. But for people that have very low commensal bacteria, I'm finding we have to kind of feed that stuff simultaneously with antimicrobials. And I find that they have a better rate of eradication too. I assume that it probably has something to do with like encouraging a lot of the bacteria out of the biofilms and stuff where it's getting hidden because they're like, ooh, there's food out there. So we have these biofilms that house the bad pathogens. Bacteria can hide in the biofilms, especially when there's not food for them. They kind of like hibernate in a way.
Got it.
And if you've done a lot of, and I would say that this is even more relevant for people that have done multiple protocols because they start to build some resistance to treatment. So if it's been a couple years, then maybe it doesn't really matter that much. But I'm getting a lot of people that say, I have done 6, maybe that's exaggeration. I've done 2 SIBO protocols in the last year, and they're not responding to antimicrobials anymore. Mm-hmm. And they're not really responding to a pharmaceutical route like using rifaximin or neomycin because they have all these antibiotic resistant genes and biofilms. But what I find is that if you give them FODMAPs as much as they can handle, they don't want them to be like a balloon, and I have to reintroduce slow, then they have a lot better rate of killing things off. But the way that I introduce really depends on how little they're eating. If they say, hey, Austin, I can't eat a banana. If I eat a banana, I blow up. And I was like, can you eat this much of a banana? Can you eat like 25 grams of banana? They're like, well, yeah, I can do that. So I'll just titrate things up every week. I'll go, all right, cool. 25 grams of fruit twice a day. You can handle that. Let's do that 2 times this week, 3 times next week, 4 times the week after. By the time we get to week 6, you're eating 50 grams servings of fruit with every meal, and you're less bloated. Your transit time between meals is speeding up because the commensal bacteria. if we still need to kill stuff off, you're going to be in a way better spot. So I definitely am still using antimicrobials and things. It's just that I find that the recurrence rate of stuff was just getting so high for a number of reasons that's where I'm like, man, I got to figure out like, why is this happening? And of course, a lot of that's theoretical. I'm theorizing, but that's what I'm seeing.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Yeah, and just for people out there too, like what are some things like commensal bacteria would eat, or maybe like examples of like FODMAP type foods, or what you're like plugging in there, just in case some people don't know, like in that scenario, like what would be some application examples there?
Yeah, most of your commensal or good microbes, if you eat soluble fiber, you're like 90% of the way there. So fruits, vegetables, fruits are usually tolerated a little better than vegetables if you're trying to reintroduce. Cruciferous veggies and things like that just blow people up. Yeah. But most people can get away with doing some berries and things like that and build up from there. If you want to be more specific with it, yeah, you can look at lower FODMAP versus higher FODMAP fruits. Frankly, it's probably kind of minutia for a lot of people. It's like eat more than you were before and just build up the amount. If you want to say, yeah, blackberries have more FODMAPs than blueberries, I mean, that's fine. But if we build up the amounts, then we'll tend to accomplish it. Now, some of the bacteria can get a little more picky. Some of the big ones like the Akkermansia bacteria that people maybe seen that one float around online. I think one of the brands there's a couple like Akkermansia probiotics and stuff. Those can get a little more picky. So you want foods that are very high polyphenol content, very high antioxidant content, which again, fruit does that. So you're good. But polyphenols and antioxidants will feed them. Prebiotic fibers or insoluble fibers will feed them. Or I'm sorry, soluble, not insoluble, will feed them. And carbohydrates, any type of starchy carb will to an extent, but it's not as specific. But if you get things that have higher in resistant starches, like potatoes might be a little higher in resistant starch. And I mean, technically you're supposed to cook them and cool them, and this is way too tedious for most people. But oats, butyrate sources, so believe it or not, things like ghee, grass-fed butter have high amounts of butyrate. So these help with short-chain fatty acids and feeding the good bacteria. So if you can cover kind of butyrate, maybe a little resistant starch if you want a bonus, high antioxidant and polyphenol foods like fruits, which also cover your fiber content, man, you're doing really, really well.
Yeah.
You're gonna, I think it really surprises people how much that helps, because they maybe have one overgrowth on their GI map and they really are like, man, I want to run 6 antimicrobials. I'm like, bro, that's like killing an ant with a flamethrower.
Right.
Like it'll work. It'll work, but there's going to be casualties.
Sure.
You know, like you're dropping a bomb on a village.
Right. You know? Right. Yeah. No, it makes sense. I mean, and I was curious too, to like that. And these are, I'm going to say a couple strategies, but I don't know if this is in your toolbox, if you will, or if you just see people doing this and then they come to you with a lot more issues. But so a lot of people trying to gain weight, we know like the massive, like powerlifters, strongman, body, like just mass monster bodybuilders. That's one extreme. But I've taken some of those concepts in the past, or I should say I've seen those taken even, and applied to like, you know, the teenage kid boy who's just trying to put on 20 pounds. One of them is they're intentionally cutting out a lot of more fiber from the diet because of the, you know, volume it takes up in the stomach, the gas, the bloating, etc. But I'm just curious if you see that a lot in like bodybuilders, because I know that was like some of the tactics that were used in like strongman competitors, even, where they would just like literally, one of the things that I heard was used on I forget what the heck is his name? Mountain, the guy who played Mountain.
Yeah,
Hoffler. Yeah, like used with him was stolen from sumo wrestlers by Stan Efferding, actually, which was putting like sugar, like dextrose on
Yeah,
rice, and some things to cut out fiber. I'm just curious, what are your thoughts on that? Is it something people can do temporarily to like intentionally downshift the fiber to get the volume that they need to get in, but they're cleaner foods? Bad idea. How long could you get away with that? Anything you have on that topic? I'm just curious your thoughts.
I've done it. I mean, my background, we didn't mention this. I mean, my actual background is competitive bodybuilding. That's what I've done for, 18-ish years. I mean, I have eaten upwards of 7,000 calories. I've done it. And yeah, you don't have a lot of room for fruits and vegetables when the volume of food is so high. So you have to kind of figure out how can you add calorically dense foods that are low volume. It could be through liquid, right? It could be through liquid calories. Like some of the carbohydrate powders and things can be good because they're very, very easily digestible, like, carbolin and cyclic dextrins and things.
Right.
Some people will use just like sugars or honey or things like that, or even fruit. Fruit juices.
Yeah.
I mean, they're all relatively low volume, and you could wash your food down with juice instead of water. And there's a lot of ways. And then that's not to mention just adding fat, especially through oils, olive oils and avocado oils, coconut oil, because it's so calorically dense per its volume. So the downside there is exactly what we, had talked about before, is that, yeah, there's still a good chance that you'll potentially end up with some dysbiosis, in the sense that the bad stuff maybe grows a little faster than the good stuff. However, in a really high calorie environment, what I found more often is that, because I've actually been able to pull GI maps on people eating like 7,000 calories, and because it's very interesting.
Yeah.
Usually everything's really high.
Okay.
So usually what we find is that the commensal bacteria is not crashed most of the time. Usually it's just there's so much food to be, that's coming in, no matter what it is, just carbohydrates, that commensal bacteria is high. Dysbiotic bacteria probably is also high. And we run into more, and then once you were to back the calories down, a lot of that would just kind of resolve itself by default. Yeah. But what we're finding more with those populations, like, for example, some of my clients will be like 300 plus pounds off season pro bodybuilders, like big guys.
Right.
Not me. I only get about 250, so I'm the small one out of the bunch. But the food consumption is very inflammatory. Also, I'm really running into more like IBD situations with that crowd, Crohn's, colitis, diverticulitis. Yeah. It's just because there's so much oxidative stress and so much inflammation from pounding food, a lot of H. pylori, a lot of acid reflux from exorbitant protein consumption. So yeah, the bacteria stuff's there, but you're really dealing with more like inflammatory issues when you're talking really, really high food consumption.
That makes sense. Is there anything someone could do if they are in a high protein diet, and maybe like the mechanisms of it escapes me how to explain it. I'm not into it as detailed as some of the people I work with, but like a high protein diet, then all of a sudden they're noticing like I get, my bad breath more often, or something's not being fully broken down. Is there anything someone could do to add into their diet that helps with like what you're describing there with the high volumes of those foods?
So a lot of it is just the fact that you probably don't have adequate stomach acid for the 400 grams of protein that you're trying to eat when you're huge like that. So believe it or not, I'm going to get burned at the stake for this one, but if you eat less protein, you will do a lot better, and you will probably actually be in a net positive because your absorption rate is so much better. I can't tell you how many times I've had, especially bigger males and sometimes females, that if we're still staying with, when we're still eating adequate protein, right? We're still eating like
enough
1 gram per pound, that kind of shit, right? But yeah, we drop it down a little bit, and they're like, oh my gosh, my reflux is gone. That H. pylori breath that I'm getting is subsiding. I'm not burping all the time. so on and so forth. So lowering protein is a great first step. You can supplement with things like betaine HCl for stomach acid, and it will work to a point. How much you want to take, I mean, I've seen people, especially men, eating really high protein diets, especially if they're coming off like PPIs and stuff and they've been really low acid. I've seen people take 20 caps a meal.
Wow.
Now that's a really dramatic example, but yeah, guys taking 2, 3, 4 caps of betaine HCl in a meal, it'll probably help through the course of the, higher food phase. A little bit of apple cider vinegar in there for acetic acid, like that'll help to a point.
Sure.
Right? I mean, at some point, the only thing that really helps is eating less food.
Yeah, and with that, because you mentioned apple cider vinegar, so I'm going to probably start to drift into a little bit of a different topic, but still under the umbrella of gut health. Is it this timing, like if we take apple cider vinegar as an example, if someone's going to use that as a protocol, is it timing like what's been recommended with glutamine, unless this has been corrected, so correct me, but for like gut permeability, they'll tell you like glutamine's been a good source, at least in the past, on like an empty stomach. Are these things that, I guess one is the glutamine statement still somewhat true, and then two would be with something like, you see these videos of these online influencers, like you drink your apple cider vinegar in the morning on an empty stomach. Like, does that matter in these strategies, like when you're taking it empty stomach versus not, and what are some examples and maybe errors people make?
So there are some things that probably work a little bit better on an empty stomach, assuming they don't upset your stomach. So you got to consider that.
Yeah.
Anything that's, let's say anything, most things that are amino acid based, like glutamine, or if you're doing like a colostrum for the immunoglobulins, I mean, these are like proteins, amino acids.
Yeah.
They probably will be better suited on an empty stomach. The downside is that, well, if it upsets your stomach, you can't really do it on an empty stomach. So you got to push it closer to a meal. Same thing with the apple cider vinegar. It's probably going to be better prior to a meal, at least, 30 minutes or between meals, if you can do it, if you can tolerate it. Some people are very sensitive.
That's true.
There's some things that you probably don't want to take on empty stomach, like some of your major antimicrobials are definitely not as tolerated as well, like oregano, maybe berberine, or allicin, like garlic extract, all those things. Think of an antibiotic. A lot of people can't take antibiotics on an empty stomach.
Yeah, that's a good point.
They're having this kind of acute or very quick effect on the gut microbiome, so they upset your stomach. So you can take them with food. That'll help slow the die-off down a little bit. So yes, a lot of the gut lining support and things probably are better suited on empty stomach if you can deal with it.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Gosh, yeah, and I think, well, I'm going to draw a blank. I was in another episode with someone who specializes in gut health, and they're talking about like berberine, for example, someone having some gut issues from taking it, but they were taking it more for the, blood sugar management, et cetera, fat loss, whatever. But I forget what the mechanism was of what was off. Now it slips my mind, but it was really like, oh yeah. Cause I personally never had that issue. I would take up to 1,500 milligrams and just be fine, So it's like, I was just blasted because I was too lazy to forget to split it up. And it was like, oh, you have issues with that, really? And this is years ago, and I realized like, oh, not everyone has a steel trap like I do. So
yeah.
But yeah, how does that work? Like, why would that cause an issue, or is it just most issues will subside if it's with food, or is it just depends on the dysbiosis or some of the other things going on?
Yeah, some of the acute reactions that you would have to something like that, the food would probably help for the most part. Kind of like I said, taking an antibiotic with food versus not. Most of the antimicrobials, they probably will be a little bit better tolerated with food. you still might feel die-off symptoms from them. So, what could that be? I mean, that could be some mild nausea, maybe even intense nausea for some people. Yep. Could
I'm
be.
sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. That makes a lot of sense, though, the nausea, because with the die-off, because I've noticed some of that, and I've heard that from other people early on, to where, it's just part of, like what you just said, like the die-off symptoms, and you kind of want to try to minimize it so it's tolerable still. But
yeah, loose stools. Loose stools is a common one. The thing with die-off is that it tells you that there's something in there that should not be in there, and it is dying.
Yeah.
So I think that die-off shouldn't be viewed as bad necessarily. Yeah, I don't want my client to be bedridden to the point where they're going to like lose their job because they can't go to work.
Right.
But if they can tolerate some level of die-off, I would prefer that we don't back it off in a sense. It just tells us that something is working. Now, there might be a point of diminishing return where if it's so stressful for them that they're like stressed out that they can't make it to the bathroom or something, that's not a good trade-off. We can reduce the intensity of the die-off. Besides taking things with food, we can just take less of it. We can also rotate things. If we're doing protocols that require 3 or 4 different things, maybe we rotate them on a weekly basis, or people do it all kinds of different ways, but maybe we do half of them for the first 6 weeks and half of them for the second 6 weeks. Heck, I've even had people do cyclical where they do like 3 days on, 1 day off.
Yeah.
And there's so many ways that you can reduce the intensity of die-off, but the takeaway is that tolerate it if you can. It's part of what is telling you that it's working.
Yeah.
But yeah, there are some common over-the-counter things that people take that they maybe don't realize have some antimicrobial effects. Like the berberine is probably the most common. Because it is antibacterial, it's killing biofilms. And there are some people that are taking, 2,000 milligrams of berberine a day for 6 months. And they're like, oh, I'm starting to get some gut issues. Like what's going on? Because it's probably wiped out a lot of commensal bacteria as well. So I think that's an interesting observation. I noticed the dihydroberberine, the newer form that they call it DHB, not the drug all the bodybuilders used in the 90s. That was a different thing. But the dihydroberberine seems to be a little bit better tolerated, absorbs a little better, less antimicrobial effects. But yeah, I guess that's maybe a good lesson to know what you're consuming.
Yeah, and I think too, like, finding the balance, like you said, to like spreading it out and what you can tolerate, because maybe from a routine standpoint, it's easier to take all my vitamins in the morning or whatever, all my supplements. Yeah. But perhaps you just don't have that luxury where you have to spread it out because the side effects are too strong. So that was one of the things you said I wanted to ask a follow-up on. For people out there that are experiencing that nausea and they're like, okay, it's killing some stuff. Yeah. This is a good thing. I can tolerate it. How long generally? I know we got different situations and nuances, but when should they say this is a bad idea? Is it after a week if they're still having those symptoms? After 2 weeks? Like, well, is there any kind of time period you say, maybe you should like maybe we're being a little too aggressive? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah, sure. So I see it go one of 2 ways. Sometimes people have die-off right off the bat. Other people, there's kind of a delayed effect. And I speculate, again, it's another one of my theories. I speculate that it has to do with probably a lot of bacteria being housed in biofilms, and it's just coming out, because it wasn't exposed to the antimicrobials initially. So what with biofilms, just so people understand, is that they house bacteria, pathogens, funguses, and it's a protective layer. It's like gooey, mucousy layer. And they can be observed in nature. There's a lot of places in nature that they're found. They're found in the gut. But biofilms can be really smart with protection. They can actually, if they've been exposed to a lot of threats, whether it be antibiotics or antimicrobials or like strict no food for the bacteria, they develop layers. They communicate with other biofilms or bacteria inside and outside. They can create layers where, so you take that berberine, for example, or you take that oregano oil, it might get through the first layer and be neutralized and never make it to the bacteria that's in there. So I do think that some people have a little bit of a delayed effect because they might take like a biofilm reducing product during their, or the antimicrobials themselves will slowly reduce biofilms. They're seeing kind of a delayed effect where the first 2 weeks they're noticing a little bit, then like 3 or 4 weeks in, they're like, oh, there it is. And then they have the die off. But regardless of when you have it, the bulk of it shouldn't last more than probably a couple weeks or so, like the intense stuff. I really find though that if it does, then of course we need to maybe revisit some of the methods that we were talking about before to reduce intensity. But sure. I really find that if we do a lot of the stuff we talked about earlier about, trying to really fortify the immune system first, they have a lot less symptoms when they go through it. So we can hopefully preemptively, set them up a little bit better. That's the goal anyhow.
That makes sense. No, that makes a lot of sense. Because that's something you mentioned there too. I've kind of picked this up a little bit where on the surface, especially like early in my career, like, in school and training people and blah, 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 I didn't really know, but you would see somebody that's a little overweight. If you picture in your mind someone who looks unhealthy, like that's what you would see, but then you'd also see they get sick a lot. And it's easy to make that, well, they're unhealthy and they get sick a lot. Well, yeah. Some of the things I've kind of been seeing a lot more, hearing a lot, and this isn't anything I think earth-shattering. I think a fair amount of people know, but I also think it's also overlooked, as obvious as it may be, as the relationship between gut health and the immune system. Can you talk a little bit about that, your experiences with it, and maybe even just a basic overview of how does the gut work with the immune system overall and, those types of things?
Yeah, there's a large portion of your immune system is located in your gut. We could just kind of say that those commensal bacteria we're talking about are the good bugs. So when you take probiotic, those are good bugs. They will help control pathogens. So for example, you breathe something in through your nose, something comes in through your mouth. Maybe you eat some meat that's not quite done. You get some like salmonella. Yeah. You might get food poisoning. Maybe you won't if the commensal bacteria and the immune system can neutralize it quick enough before you get sick. But people that lack that system will have less resilience to sickness. They'll have less resilience to not getting sick when they travel and just being exposed to different things, stuff like that. So that's part of it. And then we also have in the gut lining, a lot of people have heard the term leaky gut. It's like, sure. Super common term. Basically, intestinal permeability, things are getting through that shouldn't be getting through. But we have a mucosal lining that protects us from that. It's just that it's very depleted in most people. But that mucosal lining is kind of like a web. So if we can build up that mucosal lining, it catches a lot of stuff. It's like quicksand, it's like you're throwing it into this pit of gel where everything gets stuck in there. So that's another layer of protection that a lot of those things will get neutralized there. And then we also have some specific cells in there that do some cool stuff. Like we have something called Paneth cells that basically will release in response to the immune system. So you kind of have like your built-in antimicrobial system already in there. So they can actually release enzymes and proteins and things that are like, hey, this shouldn't be in here. We can kill it.
Nice.
So you have like your own built-in system. So there's multiple layers there. One common thing you'll see a lot is that if you do blood work, a lot of people don't use serum blood work for gut health. Now, it's very easy to get serum blood work with people because A, it's cheaper. B, most doctors will at least do a CBC and CMP, right? Even like the worst, crappiest blood work, you'll get like a CBC and a CMP.
Right.
If we're not like, okay, we can't do a GI map. But what we'll see a lot of the time is that white blood cell counts a lot of the time are like barely in range. You know, they're down in the 3s, down in the 4s, sometimes really low. We especially see the neutrophils and lymphocytes off, which are some of your primary fighters in that system. So we can actually look in there on just your most basic blood work, and we're like, yeah, you're ran down, you're burnt out, your immune system is cooked.
Yeah.
Occasionally you'll catch one that's in the midst of like an active infection where their white blood cells are really high or something like that. But so yeah, there's a few layers in there. It's a pretty complex system, but it's definitely a very important one. And that's also it's also why you see a lot of people when their gut functions better, their skin looks better, their hair doesn't fall out as much, you know, they're having less eczema and psoriasis and less acne and less like mast cell issues, you know, alopecia and like all this other autoimmunity. I mean, because it's all immune system related.
Yeah. I think it's just so fascinating because it's never ending, right? It's like, I think it's so overlooked, especially in our current food supply system. There's pros to it, you know, and there's cons to it, right? And it's like, and I think some people, especially those in more surplus type communities that, you know, make a reasonable living and they can walk by a cabinet and there's always food there that they can just grab. They really, really underestimate some of the potential harms or damages they're doing or what they're walking around in their gut. And they're thinking like, oh, I'm just overweight. And although that's true, they need to, you know, for the way they want to look, they want to drop some body fat, but perhaps X amount of pounds of that is just junk, you know, from like inflammation, fluid retention, you know, like you said, the hairs are dropping out, the whole, you know, and a lot of times it's not that it's a bad thing per se, but in the current medical field, it's like, well, you know, the way it's structured is sick care, which is, it's a good utility. If you're sick, we should have an option for that. But it's like, okay, how do we get immediate symptom relief, punch right in the face, but it doesn't really fix the root cause. And so I think that's, just as you're saying that, it's like, man, there's so many facets. Even myself, I can feel when like my diet's off a little bit. Yeah. And it's not even like it used to be 10, 15, you know, I mean, I had the bonehead idea in my late 30s to compete again. I was 39 and did that. But definitely when I was younger, I was a true blue meathead. And it was like, as long as my abs are looking good or I'm putting on size, I'm good. My diet's good. Like it didn't matter. You're rocking. But now as you get a little older, a little smarter, you're like, wait a minute, I got some brain fog today. What's been going on? I feel a little bloated. I'm, you know, my skin or whatever. So I think it's a really, I think it's a great point. I mean, just to unpack that, you know, so that people know, okay, let me look at some of this. And I also like that you brought up the blood work piece because it's a super inexpensive thing. We'll tell people, you know, bring in your labs, even if it's your last physical. It's not going to be enough to look at the full picture, but we may see something. We may spot something, educate you on it, and then you can decide from there, do you want to dive into it more or, you know, but if something pops up, even on a couple of those markers you mentioned, which are super, super inexpensive, and we're like, oh, do you ever feel this and this? And they're like, well, yeah, actually I do. It's like, might be something there, you know? Yeah, so
for sure. And you can see a lot of, I mean, most of these, a lot of these people have nutrient deficiencies and things too. And those pop up on the CBC, like all of your red blood cell counts and size and shape of the red blood cells. You've got B vitamin deficiencies and iron deficiencies and all this stuff. And it's because you're not absorbing it a lot of the time, especially for the bodybuilders that are eating plenty of it already.
Right.
You know, maybe not the general population. They need to eat more of it, but yeah, you're not absorbing it. So we still are like, well, we can maybe supplement it at least for now. You know, you're gonna feel better. It's like and that's a big kick that big thing I've been really trying to educate more people on in the last year or two is on the side of like the commensal bacteria and the micronutrients and things. It's like if you don't have those, it's like putting premium gas in your car. You know, you're taking the fancy stuff, but you don't actually have the catalyst to initiate any of the processes. Right. So you can't start anything because there's a bunch of broken links in this chain. So they're not working very efficiently. They're like, well, why is the chaseberry I'm taking for my progesterone not bringing up my progesterone? I'm like, well, you have like 73 nutrient deficiencies, and I don't think anything's working. So
you don't have the raw materials to really build that up, right? So
yeah, so I think there's so many easy things that people can do, and I go back and forth with it on a lot though, because I do know that there's a lot of power in getting people to feel better. So sometimes getting some quick symptom relief is such a huge buy-in and just morale tool that people are sick of feeling like crap.
Right.
And you can say reduce your stress and do all these things, and then in 6 months you're going to feel a little bit better. And some people might be able to chew on that. Other people, it's not going to do anything for them. And so we might just need to go a little harder right out of the gate. And if I can get them to feel 25% better in a month or less, now we can get the buy-in. Now we have this like intrinsic motivation, and they can actually do stuff. So some people just need to go low and slow, and other people they need a little more.
I think it's a great point. I mean, it's a consultative approach with that person too, right? Because I recall someone in my family that had like a mold exposure, and they did a protocol for like over a year, but also their hormones were trashed. And part of the wrestling match was, when do you start addressing, just giving you some of the raw materials back through replacement? Like, they're at the age where they definitely are a candidate. They're definitely well into perimenopause, creeping up menopausal type stage in life. So the goal was to fix the gut, fix all that before they did it. But the reality was, like, we got it towards the tail end. So there was an overlap, but it was like, I just asked the question, like, do you feel like if you had more of these raw materials in your body, you'd be more motivated to go for that walk or do that thing? Like, I'm not talking, anything but a half of a therapeutic dose even. Like, we're just talking, let's just give you a little bit of a nudge, not me. Yeah. We had a physician involved, but it was still, that was kind of the back and forth, because the perfect scenario on paper would have been like, fix all this first, and then when you take this, it's going to work that much better and more effective. But it was also like, to fix this, there's things you're not doing because you're just so damn drained that, to your point, we need to get some symptom relief.
100%. And that's a lot of, like, with a lot of the competitors to not just the general population, there's a lot of the more serious athletes and clients that it goes that direction, because the other conversation is, all right, I can get your menstrual cycle back, but as soon as you do some shit again, it's gone. So I'm just like, what's the, or, hey, I can get this, male client, we can get your testosterone level back up, but you're going to compete again next year, and again and again and again and again, and it's going to crash. And every time it's probably going to get worse and harder to recover. Or to your point, maybe they're Gen Pop, maybe they're a little bit older, maybe they're just kind of prolonging the inevitable and not getting the results that they could because they don't feel good enough to do anything.
Right.
So yeah, I'm definitely not under the impression that people don't ever need to take pharmaceutical drugs to achieve what they, to feel better. There is it's like thyroid. There are some people like, you should never take thyroid hormone replacement because you never need it. I'm like, okay, fine. But if this person will only ever do anything 50% right, and that's the best that they're ever going to get realistically, I can't hold their hand. They will benefit so much systemically from taking exogenous thyroid hormone that every single other one of these processes is going to improve.
Right.
And they're like, well, they just should do this, this, and this instead. I'm like, but they won't.
Right.
That's the thing, is that they're not going to.
Or they're fit in a given lifestyle.
Yeah.
I don't want to get too much into specifics, but I know a pretty high level athlete that their TSH was just through the roof, but it was like, this is their identity. This is their livelihood. Like, they're not going to not train at this high level or deal with these, they wouldn't call it stress, but these massive stressors and these other things that were causing some of the inefficiencies, to where it was like, well, how about we try some symptom relief, potentially, while trying to mitigate some of the other things that are causing an issue. But we just know this person's like, this is their life. Like, if you're, working mom with 3 kids and husband does his best, but isn't around as much because he travels for work, whatever, fill in the blank of the scenario. Great. Tell her to go do yoga and drink some tea and, meditate to lower her stress. Like, good luck.
Yeah. So. And I think that a lot of these, not to get too far off on a tangent, but I think a lot of the people that are doing that are very out of touch with, they might be, and again, it's not a knock on anyone. Maybe they're like single with no kids, or they're in their 20s and they're coaching people, or maybe they're not, maybe they are older, but maybe they just don't have like a typical family dynamic, or really understand the demands of that. Let me tell you what, get you a couple kids or teenagers and put them in sports, travel sports or something like that. Have a conversation. Yep. Let's see how you doing. But here's the thing, you still have to train and run your business and do all the other stuff. And then let's see how you're feeling.
I can tell you this week, there's been about, in the last 2 months, there's been about 3 out of the 8 weeks where I barely trained at all. I went from like 4 or 5 days, sometimes 2 days. I do, obviously, strength training, whatever, but then jujitsu also. And from my one daughter's in travel soccer, the other's in year-round swim, and then I had the bright idea to continue volunteering and coaching football. The lower level is 8th grade, so it's a little less of a commitment. But I blinked and I was like, I didn't do anything. It's been 6 days. It's all the time in my 20s. And I'm like, what do you mean you can't work out? Like, let's get your butt in here to my clients. And it's like, yep, I've been living this. This has been literally my life since I could remember. Pre-puberty, I was reading the Arnold Encyclopedia, right? So I've been doing this a long time, and I'm missing them too. So just for everybody out there, like 30 years of doing this, and I'm still missing a week and blinking on, wait a minute, what? Like, It's crazy, because I will say one thing that my wife and I started doing together is we do, which sounds so funny, because I would have made fun of the person who told me this when I was in my 20s as a trainer, but we do a walk every morning. And I'm like, walking is an exercise, but I'm like, it's something. Like, I'm at least moving, and I'm loosening my body up, and so I need to, I definitely, like I said, I literally just had that happen where I blinked and was like, wait, what day is this? I'm like, what the heck just happened?
I tell you, I can definitely relate, and it's again, I think that it adds a lot of perspective on how people need to be coached in a practical way. And my education of coaches has evolved so much over time, because we learn all the cool stuff, like the shiny stuff. We learn how to do the protocols. We learn about the mechanisms and how to read the labs and do all this stuff. I feel like that's important, but I'm not like a memorization tool. It is I'm going to show you how to coach real people tool and solve problems and use deductive reasoning and process elimination. And that's really where people become good at coaching. And that's where they're going to get a lot of referrals and have a lot of success. It's harder because it's not plug and play.
Right.
If it was plug and play, I would write an ebook and I would not talk to any of you ever again. Hopefully, assuming that people bought it.
Right, exactly. Well, I think your example earlier about the 25 grams, I believe is what you said to start with, of like the banana, right? I think that's brilliant, because when you were saying that, I was thinking of a conversation with a woman in my family where her coach had a perfect plan, and the coach would have told her this too. So I don't want to take away from the coach, because she has never communicated. She goes, well, my protein target, whatever, 140 grams a day, like, I just can't get there, and it stresses me out. And she's all like, I'm like, whoa. Like, do you see your posture? Like, you're beating yourself up. You're so, like, how many grams are you getting a day right now? Just give me a number. She's like, I don't know. Let's say 80. Oh, okay. Can you do 90 this week? And then after 2 weeks of success, do 100, and then 2 weeks do 110. And then, I was like, and just slowly build up.
Yeah.
I didn't think of that. And I'm like, yeah, it's okay. Like, this is your life now. This isn't an arbitrary deadline that you have to have 140, 150 grams, whatever, for the next 8 weeks. And then so you just cram it in and hope for the best. I'm like, and this individual was not getting ready for any kind of competition or anything like that.
Sure,
so they had time to, ramp it up. And I think a lot of times people feel like, this is the perfect textbook approach, but it's like, yeah, but as you said earlier in this discussion is, you're human, and there's nuances to this. So we have to be willing to adapt. So
your results, you can scale your level of adherence or complexity with your goal, and you can scale it up over time if you need to. If I think I can fix all your problems with a pretty simple plan, then I'm just going to keep it simple. If it requires more, then I can't always control that. I think it was Nick Saban who said something like, it takes what it takes.
Right.
And I'm like, maybe he's talking on a little different terms, but at the same time, I'm also not trying to make, especially for general population, I'm not trying to make anyone's life more difficult.
Right.
Like, that completely defeats the purpose. If you can get the best results with a approach that's pretty streamlined and just kind of like works in the background, it's like software, right? That's great.
Right.
I mean, that's the dream, man. And you can do that over time. I mean, that's kind of where I'm at, is my bodybuilding is like software in my brain. It doesn't really require any thought.
Yeah.
So, but people at the beginning don't have those experiences. They go to the coach who's been in the space for 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. Those people aren't you.
Right.
They
Gotta
don't. I always use this example of how they prioritize and like structure their day, is that if you were a competitor, for example, and you had a doctor's appointment at 5 o'clock, and that's when you normally trained, you'd probably just not schedule a doctor's appointment at 5 o'clock. You'd probably schedule it at a different time. The other person schedules it then, and then later remembers, oh shoot, I was supposed to go to the gym. What am I going to do now? Because it's not ingrained in them that way, right? They don't go to the restaurant and pick the healthy option automatically because it's habit. They have to think about it.
Right.
So you got to think, like, a lot of these people are starting from nothing.
Right. And it's just those baby steps and kind of building it in. And I think it's important to set that expectation in the beginning, is like, you're going to have this great plan. We'll get to it. I could send it to you now, but I don't want you to try it. Like, we got to build with where you are now. Like, I can run math calculations and we all know the foods you should be eating, but the list I'm going to give you is not going to be like, oh, I can have that. Like, it's going to be pretty straightforward. Like, lean protein sources, stuff that was out of the ground or grew on a tree, and a certain measurement of it. And let's start there, but let's also find nuance, so. Well, I appreciate you jumping on today, Austin. Just for everybody out there, can you just walk through? Obviously, we'll have this in the show notes and everything, but can you tell everybody where can they find you? Where can they find your services, your content, all the above?
Easiest place to find me is on Instagram. I'm at Austin ST, then the number 8 on Instagram. I've got a link tree in my bio, so if you go in the link tree, you can find all the stuff. I have a YouTube channel I put a lot of information on, podcasts, that type of stuff is all in the link tree. my email address is in there. You want to inquire about services, you can find that in the link tree. So everything's there. That's the easiest place.
Well, no, I appreciate you coming on, and for everybody, thanks again for checking out the episode today. Be sure to like, share, and put comments in the comment section. As always, if you have questions, we'll do our best to answer them, but we'll also, if there's something specific for Austin, we'll either put you in touch directly with him, or we'll reach out to him and get that answer to your question for you. So thanks again so much for tuning in, and thanks, Austin, for joining us. It's great.
Thanks for having me.
Take care.